The great Christian apologist C.S. Lewis wrote an essay called Meditation in a Tool Shed. And in this essay, he says that if you walk into a darkened tool shed, you may see a beam of light. And that's the only thing you can see. You can see the dust particles floating in the beam of light, but you can't really see what it's illuminating in the shed. It's just so dark. But he says once you step into that beam of light, then you can see what the beam of light is illuminating on the floor. Or if you look out up the beam, you can see through the little crack in the wall and maybe see the leaves and maybe even see the sun. It all depends on your perspective. Are you looking at the beam or are you looking alongside the beam? In Matthew 17 and Luke 17, Jesus talks about having faith the size of a mustard seed. In Matthew 17, he's coming down off the mountain of transfiguration with Peter, James, and John, and he walks into a scene with the rest of the disciples trying to cast a demon out of a young boy, and they were unsuccessful. And they ask why they were unsuccessful. He says, well, if you just had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, be removed. In Luke 17, Jesus is talking to the disciples about forgiveness and how they have to forgive somebody even if they have to do it 70 times in a day. And the disciples then say, increase our faith. And he says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can uproot the mulberry tree. So when we read those two parables, we begin to talk about faith in terms of quantity. Oh, if you only had faith the size of a mustard seed. Growing up, youth evangelists and stuff would come and they'd give us a little clear piece of plastic with a mustard seed inside of it. And we were supposed to carry that around. See, if you just have faith just this small, you can do everything. That's how this is preached. And, we carried those little mustard seeds around until there was a hole in our pocket and we lost it. But is that what Jesus is really talking about? You see, when we talk about having faith the size of a mustard seed, that implies that we can get more. It's just like going to your cupboard and getting another cup of sugar to go along with the one you've already got. How do you get more? And faith is, I don't think, a quantifiable thing. I don't think you can measure faith the way you measure sugar or flour. A few years ago when we were living in El Dorado the first time, they had hired a new outside salesman. I was a warehouse manager at an electrical supply house. And so Bud was new, and Bud and I were talking, and he told me where he went to church. And he said, where do you go to church? And I said, well, I'm the youth pastor at Bethel Chapel out in Parker's Chapel. And, well, where does David go to church? I told him where David went to church. And he said, oh, man, David must have a lot of faith. And I said, Bud, how do you measure it? How do you measure that? When faith is, to a lot of us, faith is a lot like money. You never have enough of it. How do you get more? But what I think Jesus is trying to get across to us, it doesn't matter how much faith you have. Because you see, the way we talk about it in our search for more faith, faith is the object of what we're looking for. Every sentence has a direct object or an indirect object. And so, the direct object of faith in our thinking is faith. I got to get more faith. So I'm too busy looking for faith to really know what I should be looking for. See, faith is not the object. In a biblical sense, faith has an object. And the object is always God. We don't have faith in faith. We have faith in God. Biblical faith always has an object, and it's always God, Jesus, God, whatever. So when we listen to this passage, it's not faith that moves mountain. It's not faith that moves the mulberry tree. It's God who moves mountains. It's God who uproots mulberry trees. And he's telling them, it doesn't matter how much faith you have, it's who you have faith in. There's a saying that we have in the South, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Well, we know what that means. If you've ever had a Chihuahua, and I've had Chihuahuas, my little Chihuahua I grew up with, Nicky, he was about this tall. He would take on any dog that walked into the yard, whether it was this tall or whatever. Nicky had fight in him. Mom had to chase dogs off with a broom more than once to keep them from killing my dog. It's the size of the fight in the dog. Who's our faith in? Our faith is not in faith. Our faith is in God. And instead of worrying about how much we have, let's start using what we have, using it correctly by putting our trust in God. You see, it's not faith that roots mountains and mulberry trees. It's God who does that. So whatever situation you're facing, it's not depending on how much faith you have. It's dependent on who your faith is in. We all have opinions about stuff. And we all have faith in certain people and individuals. But you see, even that kind of faith has an object. This person will never let me down. I trust this person, which is basically what faith means. It means trust. Faith always has an object. And biblically, it's always God. Our faith is in God. And it will be God that moves that mountain. It will be God that uproots that mulberry tree. It's God that will move this person out of my life. It's God that will bring a change in my heart. It's God that will get me through a hard, trying time. It's God who will do this. It's not faith. It's God. It's our trust in God who moves mountains. It's our trust in God who uproots mulberry trees. Now, I know the text says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can uproot mountains. Well, I think Jesus is being hyperbolic there, using hyper-exaggerated language. I can't walk out and tell that mountain to move, but God can if He wants to. We've got this storm coming in tonight, and it's for Sebastian County, but Scott County's not in it. So I was telling Susan, since she lives in Scott County, if it starts to come into around her house, she needs to go outside and say, hey, wait a minute, I live in Scott County. You can't do this. Well, that's kind of like us trying to stop a storm. It's like us trying to deal with something that's going on in our lives. We don't have that kind of power. But we know who does. We know who can uproot a mountain. We know who can uproot a mulberry tree. And that's who our faith is in. It's not the amount. It's who it's in. I think that's a good lesson for us to remember. Because sometimes we act like it all depends on me. I have got to do this. I have got to take care of this. I have got to deal with this problem all by myself. I. No. A little bit of trust in God and God will move the mountain. God will solve the problem. God will deal with the issue. It takes just this much. And even that's an exaggeration sometimes. There are times we wish we had that much faith, right? I wish I had faith the size of a mustard seed. It's who it's in. It's who does the work. That's who our faith is in. So the next time you walk in that tool shed and it's dark in there and all you see is that beam of light, remember, it's not the beam of light. It's where that beam of light is coming from. Step into the light and see what's possible. Step into the light and see what's in the tool shed. Step into the light and look out through the crack to see where that beam of light is coming from. Faith is like that. We're so busy looking for it that we never find it because we never step into it. We're always on the outside looking for it. Step into the light. Step into the faith. And let the one who moves the mountains move the mountain. Step into it and let the one who uproots the mulberry tree uproot the tree. If you have faith this much, Jesus said, mountains can be moved because God is the one who will move it. Thanks be to God. Amen.